The first time I met Madison Cole, I was carrying a laundry basket down the hall and looking over my shoulder instead of where I was going. My sister Lily had come home from college, maybe 30 seconds earlier, and I had heard voices near the front door, but nobody had mentioned the large suitcase sitting directly in my path. My right foot caught the wheel, the basket flew out of my hands, and I went forward with all the grace of a collapsing bookshelf. Madison had just stepped around the corner. She put both hands out instinctively, which might have saved me if I had weighed 40 pounds less. Instead, I stumbled straight into her. She staggered backward, and we somehow ended up half against the wall with me desperately, trying not to take both of us to the floor. The first thing she said after I got off her was, "Are you always this clumsy?" "I'd like to say no," I told her, picking one of my socks off the floor, "but the evidence is not great." Madison stared at me for a second, like she was deciding whether I was joking or medically concerning. She was 22, Lily's best friend from college, and much prettier than the blurry pictures I had occasionally seen on my sister's phone had prepared me for. Dark hair, sharp brown eyes, and the kind of expression that made it obvious she was not going to pretend the last 30 seconds had been normal. Lily came around the corner, saw the suitcase, the laundry scattered everywhere, and me standing 3 feet from her friend looking guilty. "Ethan," she said. "She's been in the house for less than a minute. My name is Ethan Parker." I was 30, and apparently that afternoon my role in the family was to embarrass my sister as efficiently as possible. "I tripped over her suitcase," I said. Lily looked down at it. The giant blue object sitting in the middle of the hallway? It wasn't there 30 seconds ago. Madison folded her arms. Strong defense. I apologized again, this time without trying to explain the physics involved, and asked whether she was okay. She said she was fine, though she rubbed one elbow while saying it, which made me feel worse. I offered to carry her suitcase upstairs as a peace gesture. Madison glanced at the suitcase, then at me and said, "Maybe Lily should do it." Lily laughed so hard she had to grab the stair railing. That should have been the end of my involvement with Madison for the evening. Lily had brought her home for part of their break, and I assumed they would disappear upstairs, talk about college people I had never met, and treat me like background furniture until dinner. Instead, Madison appeared in the kitchen 20 minutes later while I was making sandwiches. She leaned against the counter and watched me put a plate down with exaggerated care. "Good," she said. "Nothing broke." I looked at her. "You're going to get a lot of mileage out of this, aren't you? I nearly got tackled before I knew your last name." "Technically, you still don't know my last name, Parker," Lily told me. She smiled. "I like to research potential hazards." Lily walked in while I was trying to decide whether Madison was actually annoyed or simply enjoying herself. "Please don't encourage him," she told her. Madison asked what exactly she thought she was encouraging. Lily pointed at me. "Whatever this is." I handed my sister a plate and told her I was standing quietly in my own kitchen. "That's how it starts," Lily said. Madison laughed, and for the first time since the collision, I stopped feeling like I needed to apologize for occupying the same room. She was quick, definitely sarcastic, but not mean. If anything, the more I pushed back, the more entertained she seemed. Dinner that night was uncomplicated. My parents were out of town visiting relatives, so it was just the 3 of us eating takeout around the kitchen table, while Lily told stories from the semester. Madison mostly listened, occasionally correcting details whenever Lily improved them for dramatic effect. I learned Madison was finishing her senior year, studying marketing and consumer behavior, and had an internship interview coming up that she was pretending not to care about. She learned I managed residential construction projects and immediately said, "So you professionally prevent people from falling over things?" Lily nearly choked on her drink. I told Madison workplace safety standards did not currently cover college students leaving luggage in residential traffic lanes. "Blaming the victim already," she said. Unbelievable. By the end of dinner, I had revised my first impression of her from irritated stranger to dangerously efficient smartass. I was still aware that she was 8 years younger than me and my little sister's closest friend, which made her somebody I had no reason to think about, beyond surviving the next 10 days, without another physical collision. Madison seemed perfectly happy with that arrangement too. When Lily dragged her upstairs to show her something, Madison paused at the doorway, looked back at me, and pointed toward the clear stretch of floor between us. "Careful, Ethan. No obstacles." I told her I appreciated the warning. She smiled and followed Lily upstairs. The next morning, I came downstairs expecting an empty kitchen and 10 quiet minutes with my coffee before anybody else woke up. Madison was already there, sitting at the table in an oversized college sweatshirt, with her laptop open, and her hair pulled back, looking considerably less impressed with the morning than she had been with herself the night before. Lily was nowhere in sight. Madison looked up when I entered, glanced deliberately at the empty floor between us, and slid the chair across from her out with one foot. "You should be safe," she said. I cleared a path. I stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the chair Madison had pushed out for me. Very thoughtful. She took a sip from a mug that definitely belonged to Lily. "I'm trying to reduce household injuries." I sat across from her and noticed the screen of her laptop was filled with bullet points, half of them crossed out and rewritten. Madison closed the document almost immediately. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. You were looking. You have 12 versions of the same sentence." She narrowed her eyes. "That sounds suspiciously like looking." I got up to refill my coffee and told her I had simply observed a distressed document in its natural habitat. That earned a reluctant smile. Lily usually considered anything before 9 in the morning a personal attack, so for the next 20 minutes, it was just Madison and me. Without my sister there, Madison was different. She still teased me whenever the opportunity appeared, but there were longer stretches where she stopped performing the confident version of herself and focused on whatever was bothering her. Eventually, she reopened the document. I asked whether it was for class. "Internship interview," she said. "Friday. The company ran consumer research for several national brands, and the internship was apparently competitive enough that Madison had been preparing for weeks." She explained all of that, like it was routine, then immediately changed one of her answers again. I asked how many times she had rewritten it. "Enough. That means more than 10. You manage construction projects. Stay in your lane." I did, at least until that afternoon. Lily had gone to meet an old high school friend, and I came through the dining room on my way to the garage when I heard Madison answering a question to nobody. She stopped as soon as she saw me. "You heard nothing." "I heard something about understanding emerging consumers." Madison closed her eyes. "Fantastic. I should have kept walking." Instead, I leaned against the doorway and asked, "Do you want encouragement, or do you want someone to actually interview you?" She looked at me suspiciously. "Are those my only choices? There's also pretending I wasn't here." She studied me for a few seconds, then turned her laptop around. "Actual interview." She clearly expected me to ask the usual questions. "Why this company? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What are your strengths?" I started there, mostly to let her settle in, then changed direction. She described a class project where her team had redesigned a campaign for a struggling local business. I asked why their research mattered if the business could not afford to implement half their recommendations. Madison paused. She answered, and I asked what she would have cut first. Then I asked how she would explain that choice to a client who had spent 20 years running the business and did not want a college student telling him what he was doing wrong. Her expression changed. "That's not in the interview guide. Probably why it's useful." For the next 40 minutes, I kept pushing whenever an answer sounded polished instead of specific. Madison got annoyed twice, argued with one question, then surprised me by giving a much better answer after she stopped trying to sound like someone interviewing for a job. The problem was not that she lacked good ideas. She kept softening them. Every strong point ended with something like "I think," "probably," or "if that makes sense." After the 4th time, I held up a hand. "Stop." Madison frowned. "That bad?" "No, that's the problem." She waited. I told her, "You know the answer, then you finish it, like you're asking permission to be right." Madison looked at me without saying anything. For once, there was no joke waiting behind her expression. I worried I had pushed too hard, so I started to explain, but she shook her head. No. Say it again. I did, less elegantly the second time. I told her that when she talked normally, she sounded confident because she clearly understood the work. The moment she imagined someone judging her, she started shrinking every answer before they had a chance to disagree with it. If they don't like your answer, let them not like it, I said. But don't reject it for them. Madison stared at the laptop for a moment, then straightened in her chair. Ask me the client question again. Her second answer was shorter and better. She explained exactly what she would prioritize, what she would cut, and why. No apology attached. I nodded. That one. Madison smiled before she could stop herself. You're annoyingly good at this. I spend most of my week explaining expensive problems to homeowners who would prefer the expensive problem not exist. So interviewing nervous college students is basically the same thing? Less drywall. We did another 20 minutes before I closed her notebook and told her she was done. Madison protested that she had more questions. I told her that was exactly why she was done. At some point, preparation stopped being preparation and became finding new ways to convince yourself you were unprepared. She looked at me like she was trying to decide where I had learned that. I did not give her a story. There wasn't one. I had just managed enough people to recognize what overthinking looked like when it started eating useful work. I stood and headed toward the garage. Madison called my name before I reached the hallway. When I turned, she was still sitting at the table, but the expression on her face was different from the one she had worn since arriving. Softer maybe, more curious. Thanks, she said. Seriously. I shrugged. You did the work. She nodded once, then glanced toward the floor. And you made it all the way through without falling on me. I pointed at her. There she is. Madison laughed, and I left before I could think too much about how much I liked making her do that. The following afternoon, I grabbed my keys and called toward the living room that I was heading to the supply store and then getting coffee. Lily barely looked up from her phone. Before she could answer, Madison appeared around the corner already reaching for her shoes. I'm coming with you. I looked at her, then at Lily. My sister finally raised her head and looked from Madison to me with obvious confusion. Madison ignored her completely. What? She asked me. You need supervision. Madison followed me out to the truck before Lily could decide whether she wanted to ask questions. You know the supply store is not exactly a tourist attraction, I said as I unlocked the doors. She climbed into the passenger seat and buckled herself in. Maybe I'm interested in construction supplies. You study marketing. Maybe I'm expanding my market. I looked at her. That sentence means nothing. Madison smiled and adjusted the air vent. Drive, Ethan. I did. Mostly because arguing would have taken longer than getting to the store. The place was exactly as exciting as I had warned her. I needed cabinet hardware, 2 replacement drill bits, and a specific type of sealant for a project starting Monday. Madison spent the first 10 minutes following me, with her hands in the pockets of her sweatshirt, asking questions that sounded serious until I answered them. She pointed at a wall of nearly identical fasteners and asked why anybody needed that many kinds of screws. I gave her the short version. She listened, picked up one package, and said, So if I use this one wrong, the house falls down? No. Disappointing. You have a strange relationship with structural failure for someone who was nearly injured by luggage. She looked at me. Nearly injured by you. The suitcase was an accomplice. At some point, the teasing stopped feeling like something I needed to defend against. Madison could give me trouble without making me feel like the joke was actually me. And once I understood that, I started giving it back. When she almost walked into a display because she was looking at her phone, I caught her lightly by the elbow and said, Careful. People are going to think you're always this clumsy. She stared at me for half a second, then laughed. You've been waiting 3 days to use that. Absolutely. That's sad. Still worth it. At the checkout, one of the employees recognized me from another project and asked about a homeowner who had changed the kitchen layout 3 times after framing started. Madison stood beside me while I explained that the 4th layout was apparently the final one, although I had stopped believing in final layouts on principle. The employee laughed and asked whether I was bringing new help onto the job. Before I could answer, Madison said, "No, I'm here to make sure he doesn't trip over anything expensive." I told the guy she was an unpaid safety consultant. He nodded toward her and said, "Keep him alive. We need the business." Madison looked entirely too pleased with herself. We stopped for coffee afterward. I expected her to order something complicated, because Lily had once described Madison's coffee habits as financially irresponsible, but she ordered an iced Americano with a little cream. I apparently looked surprised because she asked what I had expected. Something with 6 ingredients and a name that requires punctuation. "That's Lily. She told me it was you." Madison shook her head. "Your sister lies when it improves a story. That is one of her core values." We took our drinks outside, and for the first time since leaving the house, neither of us had an obvious next thing to do. Madison asked about one of the houses I was managing, then somehow the conversation moved back to her interview. She admitted she had practiced my questions again that morning. "Good." She looked down at her cup. "I hate that I care this much." I asked what she meant. She said everyone around her seemed to have internships, plans, graduate programs, jobs lined up, or at least convincing stories about where they were going next. She knew comparing herself to them was stupid, but knowing something was stupid did not automatically make it disappear. "I don't want to walk into that interview sounding like I'm begging them to pick me," she said. "Then don't." Madison gave me a look. Remarkably sophisticated advice. I shrugged. "You're interviewing them too. For what? Whether you actually want to spend your summer there." She went quiet for a moment. It was not some brilliant statement. I had turned down jobs before because the money was good, and everything else about them looked miserable. Madison seemed to treat the idea like I had handed her permission. She had forgotten she already had. Then she smiled. "You're much less stupid outside your house. That's going on my business card. Residential construction project manager. Less stupid off-site. Strong branding. I know a marketing student." After that, Madison started appearing everywhere. Not constantly, but often enough that I noticed the pattern. If I made coffee before work, she would wander into the kitchen while Lily was still asleep. If I spent 20 minutes in the garage after dinner, Madison would somehow need to know what I was doing. One evening, I was replacing a damaged drawer slide when she pulled up a stool and asked whether she could watch. "Why?" I asked. "Educational enrichment. You said that at the supply store." "I'm very committed to personal growth." I handed her the old slide. "Tell me what's wrong with it." She examined it seriously for 10 seconds. "It's ugly. Outstanding." I should have understood what was happening. Instead, I kept finding practical explanations for it. She was staying in someone else's house and probably bored. Lily spent part of the break catching up with friends. Madison did not know I was around. We got along. None of that required a more complicated interpretation. The problem was that I started participating in the pattern without admitting it. If I was getting coffee, I automatically remembered what Madison ordered. If I planned to leave for an errand after work, I found myself waiting 5 extra minutes before heading out. Once I caught myself checking whether she was in the living room before I grabbed my keys, and I immediately decided that meant nothing. Madison made that argument harder a few nights later. We were sitting on the back steps after dinner, while Lily was upstairs on the phone. Madison had been telling me about one of her roommates when she suddenly asked, "Are you dating anyone?" I looked over. That was abrupt. "It's a simple question." "No." She waited. I took another drink. "What?" I asked. Madison stared at me. "Nothing." That sounded like something. I was just curious. She smiled, but there was a strange little edge to it now. Good to know. I should have asked her the same question. In hindsight, that was painfully obvious. At the time, I thought answering hers directly was the mature thing to do. Madison stood a minute later and headed inside, shaking her head like I had failed a test. Nobody had told me I was taking. By then she had spent days finding excuses to sit beside me, follow me on errands, drink coffee with me, and ask whether I was single. Somehow, I had noticed every detail, except the conclusion she thought was impossible to miss. The next morning, Madison was already at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. But this time, Lily was there too. Madison had 2 mugs in front of her and pushed one toward me before I even reached the counter. Black coffee, nothing exciting. I figured complicated drinks might overwhelm your coordination. I took the mug and told her she had officially stretched one accident into a week of material. One accident? Lily looked up from her cereal. He walked into the laundry room door yesterday. Madison turned slowly toward me. You withheld evidence. That door was open at an irresponsible angle. Lily stared at Madison. See what I grew up with? Madison laughed, and I caught my sister watching the two of us instead of eating. She had the suspicious expression, Lily usually reserved, for discovering that somebody had eaten food she was saving. It got worse over the next couple of days. Madison asked what time I usually got home from work. She wanted to know whether I was getting coffee after dinner. She remembered that I had mentioned needing to stop by a neighborhood hardware store and asked if I still planned to go. None of those questions sounded especially strange until Lily started hearing them too. One afternoon, I came through the living room and found both women on the couch. Madison looked up and asked, "Are you working late tomorrow?" Before I could answer, Lily lowered her phone. "Why do you know his work schedule?" Madison barely blinked. "I don't." Lily pointed at her. "You asked when he gets home Tuesday, Wednesday, and now tomorrow. Maybe your brother has a fascinating career." Lily looked at me. "He doesn't." I thanked her for the support and kept walking, but Madison's face had gone slightly pink. That was new. Later that evening, I was heading outside to check something in my truck when Madison followed me onto the driveway. She had been quieter since Lily's interrogation, although not exactly embarrassed. More like irritated that somebody else had noticed something she had apparently considered private. I opened the passenger door to grab a folder from the seat, and she leaned against the side of the truck. "Do you want to get coffee?" she asked. I looked at the time. "Now, that's generally how invitations work." I told her I could go. Madison did not move. "You could also ask me sometime." I paused with the folder in my hand. "Ask you what?" She stared at me for several seconds. "You cannot possibly be this bad at this." I closed the truck door. "At what?" Madison folded her arms. "Every time we do something, I'm the one who appears. I'm coming with you. I want coffee." "What are you doing in the garage? Can I sit out here?" "Are you going somewhere?" She counted them off with her fingers. "Do you think I'm just extremely interested in cabinet hardware?" I smiled despite myself. "You did seem emotionally invested." "Ethan." The joke disappeared from her voice, and I realized this was the first time she had asked me something I could not answer by pretending I had misunderstood the premise. "I like spending time with you," I said. Madison waited, clearly expecting the rest. I looked toward the house, then back at her. "But you're 22. Her expression changed immediately. "I know how old I am." "I know you know." Good start. I ignored that. "You're still in college. You're Lily's best friend. And you're staying in our house because she brought you here. If I decide you're flirting with me and I'm wrong, I don't just have an awkward date. I make your visit weird. I make things weird with my sister, and possibly I become the 30-year-old guy who hit on his little sister's friend because she laughed at his jokes." Madison looked at me for a moment, and I could tell I had irritated her in a completely different way than falling on her had. "So you decided for me that I couldn't possibly know what I'm doing." "That's not what I said." "It's close." She stepped away from the truck. "I'm not 15, Ethan. Lily and I go to college together. I live on my own most of the year. I pick my classes, apply for jobs, pay bills, date people, make mistakes, and somehow survive all of it without her brother approving the paperwork." I started to answer, but she held up a hand. "And before you say you're trying to be respectful, I know. I actually like that about you. But at some point respect means believing I can tell the difference between being friendly and deliberately spending half my week following you around." That shut me up, mostly because there was no version of the last several days where she was wrong. I had been treating uncertainty like the responsible position even after the evidence stopped being particularly uncertain. Madison watched me think through it and shook her head. "You really thought I wanted to watch you fix a drawer? You seemed curious. I asked you if you were dating anyone." People ask questions. Not like that. Apparently, I need footnotes. She tried not to smile and failed. That helped, but only a little. I took a breath. For what it's worth, attraction isn't the part I'm confused about. Madison stopped smiling. Her eyes stayed on mine, and for once she had absolutely nothing ready to say. I continued before I could retreat into something safer. I noticed you the first day. Even before I almost hospitalized you with a laundry basket. That got a small laugh. And I like having you around. Probably more than is convenient. I just didn't want to mistake your being comfortable with me for permission to turn it into something else. Madison studied me long enough that I became aware of how quiet the street was. Then she nodded. Okay, I frowned. Okay, now I know. She pushed away from the truck. And know what? She gave me a look that made the question feel embarrassing before she even answered. Ethan, I have made enough excuses to spend time with you. Her voice softened slightly. I'm not making the next one. She went back inside, leaving me beside the truck with my folder, and the uncomfortable realization that the safest thing I had done all week had finally become the thing preventing anything from happening. The next morning, Madison did not appear while I made coffee. She did not ask whether I was going anywhere after work. When I came home, she was on the couch laughing with Lily, and barely looked up long enough to say hello. She was not angry. She was not punishing me. She had simply stopped chasing. I had expected that to make everything easier. By the end of the day, I understood exactly how wrong I was. By the second morning, without Madison appearing in the kitchen, I had developed an unreasonable dislike for peaceful coffee. Nothing was actually wrong. She was still friendly when we crossed paths. She talked to me at dinner, laughed when Lily made fun of something I had done as a kid, and asked how work went without sounding cold. She had simply stopped arranging herself around my schedule. When I left for coffee after work, she stayed on the couch with Lily. When I spent half an hour in the garage, nobody appeared with a stool and fake curiosity about drawer hardware. The house had returned to exactly what I had assumed it would be when Lily first brought her home. Apparently, I hated that. I noticed the smaller things first. I still reached for the second coffee cup in the morning, before remembering I no longer knew whether Madison would come downstairs. On Wednesday, I stood beside my truck for almost a minute after work, because some part of me expected the front door to open, and her voice to ask where I was going. It did not. I left anyway, bought what I needed, and discovered the errand took 23 minutes, when nobody was there to question the entire inventory of a hardware store. It should have been more efficient. Instead, it was boring. That was when I finally stopped pretending. My problem was simply that I had gotten used to company. Madison had not disappeared from me. She had done exactly what she said she would do. She had made her interest clear enough that even I could no longer misunderstand it. Then stopped doing the part that belonged to me. There was something annoyingly fair about that. I had spent the week telling myself I was being cautious because of her age, Lily, the house, and the temporary nature of the visit. All of those were reasonable considerations. None of them explained why I kept looking toward the kitchen door when Madison was not there. They definitely did not explain why I had started checking my own plans and wondering which ones she would have enjoyed. Thursday afternoon, I came home and found Madison at the dining table with Lily, both of them surrounded by notebooks and open laptops. Madison glanced up. Hey. Then she went back to whatever they were working on. No question about where I had been. No joke about whether I had managed to survive the workday without falling down a staircase. I went upstairs, changed clothes, and stood in my room longer than I am proud of while staring at my phone. There were easier options. I could wait until dinner. I could suggest all three of us go somewhere. I could let Madison create one more opening and promise myself I would respond correctly this time. Every one of those options had the same problem. They still required her to make the situation easy for me. I went downstairs instead. Lily was explaining something on her screen when I stopped beside the table. Madison. She looked up. Yeah? I almost laughed because now that I was actually doing this, every clever version I had considered sounded ridiculous. Are you free tonight? Lily stopped talking. Madison did not look away from me. Maybe. That feels intentionally difficult. I'm learning from you. I nodded. Fair enough. There's a place downtown doing an outdoor movie and food trucks. I was going to grab dinner there. Madison waited. I corrected myself. No, that sounded like I was already going, and you could come if you wanted. I'm asking you to go with me. Lily slowly lowered her laptop screen until only her eyes were visible above it. I ignored her. Madison's mouth started to curve. With you? Yes, and Lily? Not invited. From behind the laptop, Lily said, Wow. I pointed at her without looking away from Madison. Please don't make this worse. Lily answered, I haven't said anything. Madison was fully smiling now. You said wow, that was involuntary. I told Madison I would leave at 7 if she wanted to come. She held my gaze another second, clearly enjoying how uncomfortable I was. 7 works. Then she looked at Lily. Sorry you're not invited. Lily opened her laptop again. I'm devastated. The drive downtown felt different from every errand we had taken together, because neither of us could pretend we had ended up in the same vehicle by accident. Madison wore jeans, a fitted black top, and a light jacket, and I had spent enough time before leaving choosing between 2 shirts that I was grateful she could not see inside my head. She glanced over after we had been driving for a few minutes. You're very quiet. I'm driving. You've driven before, successfully even. Mostly. I looked at her. Do you want me nervous? Madison smiled. A little, it would be flattering. I told her she looked good. That ended her teasing faster than I expected. She turned toward the window for a moment and said, Thank you. I liked that reaction enough that I made a mental note not to waste compliments by turning everyone into a joke. The outdoor event was spread across a small park near downtown, with food trucks along one side and people setting up folding chairs for an old comedy on a temporary screen. We got tacos, found a place on the grass, and spent the first half hour talking the way we always had. The difference was that this time, I did not wait for Madison to keep the interaction moving. I asked about her interview. I asked what she wanted to do if the internship worked out. When she said the year ahead was full of choices she was trying not to over-plan, I told her about the first project management job I had taken because it paid better, and the second one I took because I had finally learned money was not the only thing worth optimizing. At some point, Madison looked at me and said, This is weird. I asked whether she meant the movie, because the lead actor had been wearing the same hat through 3 different weather conditions. No, you. Encouraging. She tucked one leg beneath herself. You're asking questions. I've asked you questions before. Not like this. Before, I had to keep putting myself in your path until you noticed I was there. I smiled. In my defense, putting yourself in my path has historically been dangerous. Madison laughed, then bumped her shoulder lightly against mine. Better. I did not pull away. A few minutes later, our hands ended up beside each other on the blanket, close enough that either of us could have made the next movement look accidental. I had spent the entire week refusing to assume things. I was done with that. I turned my hand over and held hers. Madison looked down at our fingers, then up at me. Look at you. Don't ruin it. I'm not. She squeezed my hand. I'm appreciating growth. I told her that sounded suspiciously, like something from one of her marketing classes. She leaned closer. You're nervous again. You seem very pleased about that. Extremely. After the movie, I did not drive straight home. I asked if she wanted dessert, and when she said yes, I picked a place instead of making her choose. We walked there, shared something neither of us needed, and talked until the staff began cleaning tables around us. Madison told me about growing up with 2 older sisters who had made her competitive about almost everything. I told her Lily had once broken my nose with a softball and spent the following decade describing the incident as character development. By the time we returned to the truck, the evening no longer felt like a test I was trying to pass. I simply wanted more of it. When I parked outside the house, Madison unbuckled but did not immediately open the door. So what happens now? She asked. I knew what she meant. For once, I did not choose the safest answer. I want to see you again before you leave. Her expression softened. Okay, I continued, and I don't want you to be the one asking. Madison looked almost suspicious. Who are you, and what did you do with Ethan? Very funny. I told her there was a small live music place near her campus that I had been wanting to try and asked whether she would go with me Saturday. She said yes before I finished the sentence. We sat there for another second, neither of us moving toward the house. I wanted to kiss her. I was almost certain she knew that. Madison looked at me with the same patient amusement she had worn through half the week, but this time I understood the difference between waiting and asking her to do everything. I reached over, touched her hand again, and said, "I'm going to take this slowly." She nodded. "That's fine." Then she smiled. Slowly is still moving. When we walked inside, Lily was on the couch pretending to watch television. Her eyes immediately dropped to our joined hands before moving back to the screen. "Good movie?" she asked. Madison answered, "It was fine. I said the tacos were better." Lily nodded with exaggerated seriousness. "Great. Glad everyone had a normal evening." Madison laughed and let go of my hand only long enough to head upstairs. I watched her go, then looked at Lily. My sister raised one eyebrow. "Do not." I didn't say anything. "Your face is saying plenty." She smiled and went back to the television. For the first time since Madison had arrived, I did not feel like I needed my sister to explain what was happening. The problem now was simpler. Madison was leaving soon, and our house would stop giving us excuses to be in the same place. If I wanted this to continue, the next choice could not depend on her visiting Lily. It had to be mine. Madison got the internship offer Friday morning. I knew, because I was halfway through measuring a cabinet opening at work, when my phone buzzed with a message that said, "I got it," followed by enough exclamation points to make the screen look damaged. I called her during lunch instead of texting back. She answered on the first ring, already laughing, and spent the next 5 minutes trying to sound calm while explaining that the company had offered her the exact summer position she wanted. I congratulated her, then reminded her that she had earned it before I ever sat across from her with a list of interview questions. "I know," she said, "but you helped." I told her I would accept partial credit if it came with dinner. "Saturday?" she asked. "Already planned." There was a pause. "Look at you. Please find new material." "Absolutely not." By then, her visit was almost over. Madison was going back to campus Sunday afternoon. And for the first time, that fact felt like something I needed to respond to instead of simply accept. I did not want her changing school plans, internships, or anything else. Because we had spent 10 unexpectedly good days together, she had a life that existed before she walked through our front door, and I liked that about her. But I also did not want to fall back into the comfortable version of myself that waited for circumstances to decide everything. So before our Saturday date, I checked my schedule for the following weekend, found a Saturday I could keep clear, and looked up the drive to her campus. It was a little under 2 hours, long enough to require intention, short enough that pretending it was impossible would have been embarrassing. We went to the small music place I had mentioned the night before. It was crowded without being loud enough to kill conversation, and Madison seemed more relaxed than I had seen her all week. The internship offer had removed something from her shoulders. She teased me about checking whether the chairs were level before sitting down, and I informed her that after our first meeting, I had become professionally committed to stability. Halfway through dinner, she asked what I was doing the next Saturday. I smiled because I had been waiting for the question, even though this time I already had an answer. "Driving to your campus." Madison stopped with her glass halfway to her mouth. "You are? Assuming you're free." "For what?" "Dinner. You can show me the place you keep claiming has the best tacos in the state." Her expression changed slowly. "You remembered that?" "Unfortunately, yes. You've mentioned it 6 times. Madison put her glass down. "That's almost 2 hours from here." I nodded. "I own a truck. That wasn't my point." "I know." She studied me for a second. What mattered was not the drive. We both understood that. For most of her visit, Madison had been the one stepping into my routine, asking where I was going, appearing beside me, creating another hour together whenever I gave her the opening. Going to her campus meant the next part would not depend on Lily bringing her home again. I would be entering Madison's life because I wanted to be there. "Saturday works," she said. Then, quieter, "I'd really like that." We walked for a while after dinner. At one point, Madison stopped outside a closed shop and looked at me with an expression that made me nervous in a way I had finally learned not to avoid. "Can I ask you something?" I said sure. If I hadn't kept showing up, would you ever have asked me out? That deserved a real answer. I told her probably not during this visit, at least not quickly enough to matter. I had noticed her immediately, but noticing someone and deciding you had the right to pursue them were different things in my head. Madison nodded. "Fair," I added, "but if you're asking whether I'm only doing this because you made it easy, no." She looked at me. "You made it possible for me to understand what you wanted. That's different." For once, Madison did not tease me. She stepped closer instead. "Good answer." I told her I had been practicing. "With who?" "Very demanding 22-year-old marketing student." She smiled. I put one hand lightly against her waist, giving her plenty of room to decide what happened next. Madison looked at me for half a second, then closed the distance herself. The kiss was warm and surprisingly calm after all the buildup, which made it feel more real. There was no dramatic moment where the entire world disappeared. I was still aware of cars passing behind us and somebody laughing outside a bar across the street. I was also very aware that Madison had one hand against my chest and was smiling when we pulled apart. "You didn't fall," she said. I laughed. "I knew you were going to ruin this somehow." Sunday afternoon, I carried her suitcase toward the car, while Lily followed with two smaller bags. Madison came out behind us and immediately pointed at the suitcase in my hand. "Careful." I stopped. "I have developed a professional respect for this thing." Lily looked between us. "Please don't tell me the suitcase is romantic now." "It tried to kill me," I said. Madison corrected me. "You attacked me. History is written by survivors." Lily groaned and walked around to the passenger side. Before getting in, Madison stayed beside me in the driveway. "You know you made one of the worst first impressions I've ever seen." "I'm aware." I genuinely thought Lily had somehow forgotten to mention that her brother was a complete disaster. "That feels unfair. You landed on me before saying hello." I had no defense against that. I told her it was lucky she stayed around long enough for a second impression. Madison smiled. I was already curious before that. I looked at her. She admitted Lily had talked about me for years, usually while complaining about something I had done, and Madison had expected me to be different. "Different how?" I asked. "More boring." I put a hand over my chest. "That's touching." She laughed, then glanced toward Lily, who was very deliberately pretending not to watch us through the windshield. Madison looked back at me. "After the interview practice, I started looking for reasons to be around you. I noticed eventually, very eventually." I told her there had also been a point when I started waiting before leaving the house, because I thought she might come along. Madison stared at me. "And you still thought I was just being friendly?" "I never claimed to be good at this." She smiled and stepped closer. "No, you're apparently better at falling." I kissed her goodbye before she could make that joke worse. Then I helped Lily load the last bag and watched them pull out of the driveway. The house was quieter afterward, but it did not feel like those empty mornings earlier in the week. There was already a plan. The following Saturday, I drove to Madison's campus, met two friends she had told me about, and finally ate the tacos she had been advertising, like she owned part of the restaurant. She was waiting outside when I arrived. This time she did not need Lily, an errand, a hardware store, or an excuse to put herself in my path. I had gone looking for her. I still think it is funny that I can coordinate contractors, budgets, inspections, and homeowners without much trouble. But one blue suitcase nearly defeated me, before Madison even knew my name. Maybe the embarrassing part was useful. She met me at my least impressive, then had enough time to decide whether there was anything underneath it worth coming back for. What mattered most was that once I finally understood why she kept finding me, I stopped making her do all the work. If your younger sister's adult best friend clearly started pursuing you, would you take the chance or keep the boundary in place? Tell me what you would do in the comments. And if you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe for more.
You know what I found kind of funny by the end of this story? Ethan was actually really good at spotting Madison's problem during that interview practice. He could immediately hear when she knew the answer but kept softening it because she was afraid of being judged, and he basically told her to stop rejecting herself before anyone else had the chance. Then this man went and did almost the exact same thing with her. He knew he liked Madison. He noticed when she started finding reasons to be around him. He remembered her coffee order, started waiting around before leaving the house because he thought she might come with him, and even admitted that the attraction was never really the confusing part. But instead of trusting what was happening, he kept building another explanation for why he might be wrong. And to be fair, I completely understand why he was cautious. She's 22, he's 30, she's his younger sister's best friend, and she's staying in the family home. That is not a situation where I'd want a guy assuming too much too quickly. If Ethan had started hitting on Madison after 2 jokes and 1 coffee, I probably would have liked him a lot less. But there's a point where caution stops being respectful and starts becoming a way to avoid taking any risk yourself, and I think Madison was right to call him on that. What I liked about her is that she didn't keep escalating forever. She made her interest clear, she gave him plenty of opportunities, and once she realized she was doing almost all the work, she just stopped. She didn't punish him, she didn't flirt with somebody else to make him jealous, and she didn't suddenly act like she hated him. She just stopped arranging herself around his life. Honestly, that was probably the best thing she could have done, because another obvious hint wouldn't have taught Ethan anything. What finally got through to him was realizing how much he missed her when she wasn't there. And that's when I started liking his side of the romance a lot more. He didn't ask her out because she cornered him into it. He asked her out because once she stopped making everything easy, he had to decide whether he actually wanted to do something himself. I also think the internship part helped this relationship feel more believable. Without that, Madison could easily come across as a 22-year-old who just thinks her friend's older brother is attractive. But that conversation showed why she actually started seeing something in Ethan. He listened to her seriously, challenged her without talking down to her, and gave her advice that genuinely helped her. And on the other side, Madison brought Ethan out of this habit of thinking that the safest decision is automatically the best one. The age difference still gives me a little pause, but honestly, Lily being in the middle would concern me more. If this goes badly, she's the one who has to deal with her brother and her best friend afterward. I'm actually surprised she stayed as relaxed as she did, because if I were Lily, I'd probably have at least one conversation with both of them before pretending everything was normal. But by the end, I did believe Ethan and Madison had a real shot, especially when he decided to drive to her campus. That mattered more to me than the kiss because Madison had spent most of the story entering his routine. Going to see her meant Ethan was finally choosing to enter hers. So I've got a question for you. If you were Ethan, would the fact that she was your younger sister's best friend be enough to make you leave it alone, even if the attraction was clearly mutual? Or once Madison made her feelings that obvious, would you take the chance?